Hi, you're listening to Marcia Pally and conversations I'm having with people about the criteria we should use to design and implement our economic and political policies. What should be our basic framework for determining public policy? These conversations are based on ideas from a book of mine, Commonwealth and Covenant, Economics, Politics, and Theologies of Relationality, because we're looking specifically at relationality as this framework for policy. Relationality includes both the individual person and the relations and contexts that he or she is in. Relationality is developed in many of our philosophical traditions and also in several theological traditions. Whether you think theologies are the word of the divine or an illuminating metaphor, in both cases they offer us much about how the world and people work, and so about the policies that will lead to the greatest human flourishing. Please join us in this series of conversations. Commonwealth and Covenant was published by Erdman's Press in 2016. You can follow me at marciapally.com or search for me on Facebook and Twitter.
If we are of God, as I have been suggesting, if we are of, partaking of, somehow the cause of causes so that we have existence per se in us and also our particular differentiated characteristics, does this limit free will? Is it the case that we can only, if we are possible expressions of the one source of sources, can we express only one has been predetermined by the cause of causes? Does it limit our free will? Merleau-Ponty is concerned, especially with the notion that a cause of causes limits our absolute or ontological contingency. It limits our discussion of absoluteness of our existence itself. It teleologically directs our investigations to God in discussions of what is the meaning of the existence, what is the meaning of our existence. Our discussions of life's causes and meaning must end with the cause of causes. He is concerned that the idea that we are expressions of the cause of causes, distinct but in relation to the cause of causes, limits our ability to discuss and get at the meaning of existence. He's wondering if we have rigged it so that we have to come out that the meaning of existence comes with the cause of causes, right? And we know the telos, it's a teleological argument, we know the telos or the end before we start. Does this limit our discussion of existence? It's not clear that this is the case, that Merleau-Ponty really has a problem. Assuming that a source of existence exists, somehow it has not stopped challengers, including Merleau-Ponty, from declaring that it doesn't exist. From declaring that life's causes and meaning end nowhere, or natural phenomena have no undergirding ground. If one believes that the source of being is God, God, too, has not stopped us from discounting God. It seems that we have more freedom than Merleau-Ponty is afraid. It seems that we need not fear that we have less freedom than, in fact, the divine setup has set us up with. Whatever the setup is, whatever the cause of causes is, it has allowed us to sit around university tables and cafes and Starbucks and declare that there is no God and that there is no source of sources, no cause of causes. Whatever has caused anything to be has certainly allowed for that possibility. In short, it hasn't limited our free will in discussing the meaning of existence. We can sit around here and say existence has no meaning. It hasn't stopped this possibility. So we actually have more wiggle room than Merleau-Ponty fears. Those who don't recognize the source of being may freely continue understanding the world that it doesn't have a source of being. But those who believe that there is a cause of causes, there is something that makes everything, that makes something rather than there being nothing, they are justified in holding that they can come to know something about that source of being, because we are in it, we are of it, and we are of its analogous expression. Again, if you don't believe in a source of being, that's fine. But if you do, you also may justifiably say that you can know something about the source of being, because you are of it. You are in, as Aquinas said, in intimate relation with it in order to be at all. And you are its analogous, not identical, analogous expression. So you have some access to the source of being because you are in it and of it. Now there are two important reasons for this. First, as our perceptions, our sense perceptions, and our thinking, these too are of the source of being. If they exist at all, they are somehow of the source of being. The source of being is therefore not external to us when we think. The source of being is in itself in play when we think, because our thoughts and perceptions themselves are also of the source of being. So when we perceive and think, the source of being is somehow involved in the act of thinking. We are not cut off. Mediated through our humanness, the source of being is involved in the process of thinking about anything, including about the source of being. So we have access to something of the source of being when we think itself, because the act of thinking is also of the source of being. I think the chalk is over there. Great.
Yeah. There was always, you had nothing, so it's the source of sources, yes. And then there suddenly was the first distinction, yes, an infinitive line, and infinite line. And then it started to come out something of it, like some distinct person, however, with a long nose, and it was always open here. Yeah? And then maybe a tree, and then another person distinct from the other. And then they started to move, and they had small stories. So you have this source of sources, then you have a first distinction. It's like in system theory, you have to have a first distinction, otherwise there will be something. And then there comes something out of this first distinction, but you still have a connection to this source, and you couldn't exist without any distinction within this source. So I think I just realized it's really genius. Okay, maybe this helps.
It is, this is very, very nice that if we think of this first distinction between the cause of causes and all existing things, right? We are radically different from the cause of causes, yeah? But from this difference, right, emerges all the differentiated things in the world. And this is a little bit about thinking what Johann Georg Hamann said, Kant's critic, when he said, he objected to Kant's saying that we have only the transcendental categories in our mind and we impose our mental categories on the world. And he said, no, our thinking is part of the world. Our words, our language is part of the world, like coffee cups. It's part of the world. And our language, our poetry, our symbols, our metaphors, our reason, our emotions, they're all things in the world. They are also of whatever causes everything. And so, the act of thinking is also emerging from the cause of causes. The second reason is that we can work backwards, so to speak, for understanding world to understanding its source. Remember, everything in the world emerges from the one source, cause of cause, the one unity. So if we look at how things are in the world, we have some ability to learn something about the cause of causes. Now let's take an example that we've actually already had. We observe the world and we notice that things are differentiated and also in relation. We notice this because when we start violating our relations, we end up with unfortunate consequences. This can happen in one-to-one relations. If you don't attend to your relations, they suffer, right? Your relationships, they suffer. But it can also happen economically. If we don't attend to our mutual impact and our relations economically, people will suffer. So we notice here on Earth that we are differentiated and yet in reciprocal relations. And that gives us some reason to think about how differentiatedness in relation would also be in some way linked to the cause of causes. And that's how we got to the theology that the cause of we are radically different from the cause of causes, but in intimate relation with him, it, she. Yep. So the premise here is that we are not cut off from the cause of causes. The cause of causes is involved in the act of thinking about the cause of causes, or about the act of thinking about anything else. And also, we have access to the world. And we can work backwards, so to speak. Again, I'm speaking metaphorically, to try to understand something of the cause of causes in our mediated human way. The Jewish philosopher Yoram Hazony writes about this working backwards, so to speak. God's wisdom and truth are in principle recognizable as such by human beings according to the standards of the present world. By looking at the way the present world works, you can recognize God's wisdom and truth. For example, the idea you're not cut off from the cause of causes, observe the world, and you can learn something about the cause of causes. And now we're into the world of interpretation that we talked about earlier. People will observe the world and come to different hypotheses about what's going on. The economy is bad, or the middle class is shrinking. The middle class has wage stagnation for 40 years. The poor are getting poorer, the middle class is dropping into the lower classes. What's the reason for that? People will come to different conclusions. They're observing the same world. Yeah? Okay. But here we come to the value of multiplicity of interpretation. The cause of causes may know absolutely why we're having the economic problems that we're having. We don't know absolutely. We have to accumulate our thinking about it. We have to accumulate our thoughts about it. And hopefully, slowly, we will accumulate enough good ideas to come to a better understanding of how the world works. So this is to say, we're not cut off from the way the world works, and we're not cut off for the cause of causes that is the ground for the world working the way it does. But we have to think long and carefully and multiply to slowly get at the way the world works. We are not working in the dark, trying to figure out the world, yet unsure if our experience in fact informs us anything about it. That's the Kantian dilemma. You don't know if your experience informs you about anything because you are fundamentally cut off from the noumenal world. We may rely on our experience of nature and history as it teaches us about the world. And should we err, make a mistake, later experience and thinking correct us, and multiplicity of thought corrects us. At bottom, this is an anti-Cartesian and anti-Kantian view of world and humanity. We are not inside our minds, separated from world, with little, if any, access to it. We are in the world. We and our thoughts are of the same stuff as the world, given by whatever makes anything and everything exist. Thus, we have some imperfect access to it. We may come to know something about it. What is it that we relate to in relationality? If we are distinct but in relation, what is it we're relating to? And I want to talk about the Neoplatonic tradition. And I want to talk about it by quoting the student who said to me, this is her explanation of the setup and what we relate to. There's a setup to the world. I'm in it. So that setup sets me up too. And when you relate to me, you're relating to the setup that sets me up. Sounds a bit humorous, but I think that student is accurate. There's a setup, I'm in it, that setup sets me up. When you relate to me, you're relating to me, but you're also relating to the setup that sets me up, because the setup that sets me up is in me, metaphorically. Yeah? Are we okay about this? This invites re-looking at the Neoplatonic tradition. Away from the polarizing divisions of being and particular beings, or spirit and matter, mind, body. Plato described existence with a form-particular distinction. There is the idea of something, for example, tuna, and then there's each particular tuna fish in the sea. The polarizing account of Plato led to a reinterpretation that prioritized the form, the transcendent, the spirit, the immaterial, over the particular, the material, and the specific. Now that's not necessarily Plato. It's a certain reading or interpretation of Plato, prioritizing form, spirit, transcendence over particular and material. Furthermore, with this priority, or prioritizing, came the likening of our mind to spirit and form, and our body to the material, denigrating, devaluating the material and the body, and elevating the mind. This also creates something of a mind-body binary. And it's a kind of scary thought, because it leaves the mind to make decisions about the material world from a very abstracted place. We've separated mind, spirit, spirituality, form, from the denigrated and lowly body material specifics. So we've got mind over here making decisions about the material world from a dangerously distant place. I'd like to propose instead a more bodily interpretation and reading of Plato, which preserves the importance of both the unfolding source of being, the one unity, and the specifics, the material. We are all, when we say we're differentiated beings, I'm talking about your material selves, right? And I'm also talking about your individual, particular, unique thoughts, which on the relational view are part of the world. And in a more bodily Neoplatonism, there's more fluidity between form and particular, between spirit and body, between one unity and any particular being that is. There's more fluidity because not only do particulars partake analogously of form, being, transcendence, the cause of causes, but each singular being in its material self also gives expression to the one self-expressing cause of causes. In short, particulars are good for form too. Yeah? It's not a division. The model is not a division between spirit and mind and thinking and bodies, material world, but rather more of a continuing circle or cycle where form self-expresses into particulars, but particulars, the particular people you are also, as we said earlier, expressions of the source of everything. Right? You give expression to the source of everything. So it's a much more cyclical view, a more yin-yang view of existence. Your spiritual artistic expression, the music you make, the dance you make, the art you make, the prayers you make, the philosophy you make, are not separate from your material self. This is also Hamann's point, Johann Georg Hamann's. Your thoughts, your art, your spirit are part of your material self. They are all things in the world, and they all emerge in different ways from whatever causes anything to be. So this is an attempt to get away from the division of mind and body, spirit, material, to a much more fluid understanding of our spirit, our soul, our thoughts, our poetry, our symbols, and our material selves. It's away from the binary.
There's a slower development of this in schools where they're realizing that children can better learn when they move, language is getting better, when they take account, because there's been such a long tradition of children sitting and teachers teaching and pulling in this spiritual mind, whatever.
This is an example, I think, of what we were talking about before, that the accumulation ideas over time may give us a better idea of things over time. So we have had periods of human history in which the mind-body split has gotten a loud microphone, and then over time, slowly, we're learning more and more about how the body affects the mind and the mind affects the body, and how interactions with other people affect the neurochemistry. Yeah? All these things that were considered social are actually also physical. When we talk about neurochemistry, we're talking about neurons, real chemicals, that you can measure, that have chemical composition. We're learning how mood affects biochemistry. Yeah? How anger affects health. We are learning all these things that we thought were immaterial about our emotional and mental selves are actually emerge from and reinforce bodily states. Yeah? So we're perhaps learning a little bit more about how we are. And that's the accumulation of multiplicities of knowledge. As we've seen in the Merleau-Ponty quote a few minutes ago, we see that the idea of the incarnation is a a very illuminating expression of this. The unfolding source of being expressing itself in human beings is a principle of the incarnation. Whether you see it as God's presence on earth or as an illuminating metaphor, the source of being inheres intimately and analogously as an influence, analogously in each of us as in the prototypical example of Jesus Christ. In Jesus Christ, we have a very, in some sense, alarming and clear example, alarming in the good sense, alarming and clear example of the cause of everything in a human being. Now, some people think that is God's presence on earth. Some people think, I don't know about God, but that's a really interesting way of explaining that the cause of causes expresses itself in each of us, and that our materiality is not separate from either completely from the cause of causes or from our own immaterial parts like our minds and thoughts. In short, you could say that the polarizing interpretation of Plato, right, form, body, immaterial, material, spirit, particular, that the polarizing interpretation of Plato is canceled out by the concept of the incarnation. The spirit and mind are not above body. They are as they are by being. The spirit and the mind are as they are by being embodied. This is what I meant when I said if you didn't have a body, you wouldn't have thoughts. Your spirit and mind are as they are by being embodied. Each person, the Scottish philosopher and theologian Thomas Torrance writes, each person is not body and mind, but body of his mind and mind of his body, a unitary whole. Augustine said similarly. Augustine noticed that since humanity was finite and material and language using, we use language to communicate, meaning we are not in perfect unity with each other and we're not in perfect unity with God. We have to rely on words and we make mistakes. We are finite, we are material and language using. Now this makes us look that the material world is less than the spiritual world. But Augustine then notices, now wait a minute, before the fall, we were still finite and material and language using. So our bodily life, including our language, our bodies, cannot per se be sinful, cannot per se be denigrated or devalued from the spiritual. Because before the fall, we were also material beings and language-using beings. And Augustine continues that, in fact, in Genesis, God's judgment of creation, God's judgment of bodily particulars, lizards, frogs, people, is good. Right? The end of every day in creation, what does God say in the first chapter of Genesis? And it is good. And at the end of the sixth day of the creation of humanity, it is very good. So it cannot be, Augustine reasoned, that our physicality, our bodiliness, is per se wrong, sinful, devalued. Yeah? And Augustine, too, was looking for much more fluidity between all the aspects of existence, form and particular, and also the aspects of human existence, mind, thought, emotion, and body. And we are reminded that they were all judged to be good.
I just felt reminded of a movie, which I can't recall the name, but there's this movie, the actor's coming later. Man transferring his mind into a machine, into a PC, computer, and then living with this new body. So I've thought about if there is this, like this movie is playing with the separation of body and mind, but still the actor, the mind gets a new body.
Here's another film that plays with the idea. Well, I can think of two films. Steven Spielberg's Artificial Intelligence. Did any of you see that film that came out a few years ago? Well, it's about a robot in the form, takes place sometime in the future, a robot in the form of an 11-year-old boy that can be programmed not only to think, but to have emotions. Now, what is the status of this robot? Okay, so it's playing with this idea of mind and body. That robot gets its mind not from a carbon-based, we are carbon-based, right? We are carbon-based creatures. And he is not carbon-based, he is plastic-based or something. But he has mind and emotions from that kind of body, actually, but not from no kind of body, right? Not from no body. It's just a different body from our carbon-based body. Have any of you seen the film Her?
Yeah, I've seen that, yeah.
This is a very recent film. It's about 1.5, 2 years old. It's about falling in love with your operating system. I mean, some of us already are in love with our operating system.
Whose voice is Scarlett
Johansson, yes. It's very much easier to fall in love with your operating system if you know that Scarlett Johansson is reading it to the microphone. And there's an interesting scene where the operating system, played by Scarlett Johansson, feels very guilty that she doesn't have a human body. She has a body, it's in the computer or in the phone, but she doesn't have a human body. So she organizes to have a human female surrogate come to his apartment in order to have a bodily experience as a representative of her. And of course it doesn't work. Right? It doesn't work because the human female surrogate is not Scarlett Johansson, right? It's not the operating system. Yeah. So I think these films are actually playing with this mind-body idea. But in the theology that we're developing, it's important that not only your bodies, but your thoughts emerge from the cause of causes, that your thoughts, your spirituality, your art is not separate from material existence.
I think maybe this is a bit poetic what I'm saying, but I think we have as many interpretations as God within us resonates uniquely in each of us.
Actually, there's an Eastern Orthodox theologian, that's my computer telling me I did something I'm not allowed. Yeah. There's an Eastern Orthodox theologian, David Ben-Hur, who says, Julia, pretty much what, something very similar to what you say in his, he said that we come to the delightful recognition, delightful I think is his word, delightful recognition, because the cause of causes self-expresses in each particular. We are left with the delightful state of affairs that as we each individually and specifically become more of who we are, we actually reflect the more of the cause of causes. And so we'll wrap that up here for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.